Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Today, we answer your questions in a mailbag episode. How concerning have the Knicks' struggles against top-tier competition been? Will starting Immanuel Quickley over Quentin Grimes increase the team's chances of re-signing him? Could a couple of big trades be on the horizon? And how patient should the Knicks ultimately be with Quentin Grimes? All that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, and this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We are now available on all platforms, and that includes on YouTube, where you can see my smiling face, and maybe as even more of an incentive, you can see all the questions in this mailbag episode as they go up. If you want to subscribe on YouTube, you hit the button that says subscribe. You're welcome for that. And you hit the notifications bell so you never miss an episode. And be sure to do the same on your preferred audio platform. And then if you want to take things to the next level, make this relationship a little bit more serious, you can subscribe to our Subtext, where you will get texts from Alex and I before and after every Knicks game with our thoughts, random texts throughout the day with Knicks thoughts. And the beauty of it is you can send us questions whenever you want on the New York Knicks. So be sure to do that. The link is in the episode description. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, fresh off the New York State Football Championships, and now in Phoenix, and going to do a little bit of work for the Suns, not on the air, but on the stat side of thing. That will be really cool. All right, and we are going to start off this mailbag episode with a great question from my buddy Bugsy Sig, and Bugsy wants to know, is it concerning that the Knicks have yet to defeat a team ahead of them in the standings this season? Granted, it's a small sample size thus far, but worrisome heading into a very difficult stretch of games this month. So I was super happy we got this question from Bugsy, because it's something that I wanted to address on the podcast at some point, regardless, because you look at the Knicks schedule, it is absolutely glaring that they have done a fantastic job of doing something they have rarely done in the past, and that is taking care of business against bad teams, right? They beat the Hawks, they beat the Cavs without their stars, they beat a Clippers team who's not, certainly not bad, at least anymore. But was in their first game all coming together. They beat the Spurs, they beat the Hornets 3 different times, they beat the Hawks again, they beat the Wizards, Miami, pretty clearly their best win of the season. They had to come back from a 20-point deficit in the second half, pull off something they haven't done in about 20 years, only the second time in franchise history they've overcome a deficit that big or bigger. They beat the Hornets again. They beat the Pistons. They beat a decent Raptors team. And those are their wins on the season, right? So they take care of business when they should. Let's go through their losses. So really close one on opening night, 108-104 to the Boston Celtics. Absolutely no shame in that. I will get into why in just a second. Their second loss of the year against New Orleans raised some eyebrows for me just because of how it went down. They lose their second one, their second of a back-to-back against the Cavs. Cleveland was beat up. That was not a great loss, but again, tough to beat the same team twice in 2 days, almost regardless of who it is in the NBA. They lose their first game to the Bucks. That was the one where Julius Randle, it was the nadir of his horrific early season experience, where he just shot about as badly as possible. The Bucks hit every single shot. Jalen Brunson went off. The Knicks still had a chance to win that game late. They get blown out down the stretch against Boston after a competitive 2.5 quarters, lose 114-98. They lose to Minnesota by 17, and what was up to that point probably their worst game of the season. Heartbreaker, Devin Booker hits a game-winning 3 against the Suns. We all remember that. And then what is now their worst game of the season, in-season tournament, lose 146-122 to the Milwaukee Bucks. All right, so what are the common denominators there? And these might not have been present in every single loss, but I think that's when I'm asked what my concern level is, and I guess I can just start off by summing it up as maybe about a 4 out of 10. I try to look at what was present in each and every one of those losses and how fixable is it for the New York Knicks, and also relative to the expectation that I didn't really expect the Knicks to beat any of these teams, at least the Eastern Conference ones. So I'm mainly thinking about the Celtics and the Bucks in a playoff series this year. You do expect the Knicks to be at a point, especially given their statistical profile after getting Josh Hart last season, and then their statistical profile so far this season, where they should be in games against those teams. and win maybe like against teams the Celtics and the Bucks caliber, I want to say about 30% of those matchups. They should win a little bit more than 1 out of every 4. They shouldn't be going 50-50 with them because they are just not in the same universe from a talent perspective, but they are good enough at this point, and every statistic out there screams that they're good enough at this point to be competitive and at least occasionally beat those teams. So how much of those losses so far this year are a product of small sample size? They haven't got a ton of games against those teams versus the Knicks having some fatal flaws in those matchups. So let's go through the common denominators one by one. The most noticeable one for me is being overwhelmed by size and length. The Knicks are a small team, and that sounds weird to say when you have Julius Randle, who is just one of the more intimidating dudes in the NBA when he's locked in from a physicality perspective, and Mitchell Robinson, who in some ways is the baddest dude in the NBA. And no, he's not Luka Doncic, he's not Steph Curry, he's not LeBron, he's not Kevin Durant, he's not Devin Booker, like putting a dagger in your eye, obviously. But from a rebounding perspective, in terms of matching up with someone mano a mano and saying, I am going to keep you off the glass, I am going to win the race to this basketball, Mitchell Robinson is the apex of that in the NBA this year. Maybe Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic on the right night could bully him a little bit, but that's kind of been Mitch this year because he is unstoppable in terms of his ability to get rebounds. So I say that as a caveat to the fact that despite the fact that the Knicks have those two on their front lines and kind of have the epitome of toughness and that they're the best rebounding team in the league, they are so small, 1 through 3, right? And that gets only further driven home when you take Quentin Grimes off the court and you put Immanuel Quickley in there, and to a lesser extent, when you put Dante DiVincenzo out there, right? And Jalen Brunson is a fire hydrant, but he is a tiny fire hydrant. RJ Barrett is a decently sized small forward. He is not one of those supersized 6'10" small forwards that you see making their way throughout the NBA right now, or at least when he plays the 4, he is certainly undersized. Josh Hart, your backup 4, is probably about 6'5" on a good day. They are a small team in some ways. And when they play a Minnesota or they play a New Orleans, who 2 through 5 are playing guys that are like 6'5", 6'8" to 6'10", and then a 6'11" power forward, and then a 7+ foot center. I mean, I'm mostly talking about Minnesota there, but New Orleans just has waves and waves of big wings. You see issues come out for the Knicks, and you see the same thing against the Boston Celtics, where Jason Tatum is enormous, and Quentin Grimes is the guy who gets the assignment to guard him at times, and he doesn't have a chance from a height perspective. RJ Barrett is giving up 2 or 3 inches in that matchup, and those are the games where we've seen the Knicks lose by 15 plus. It's usually those size issues. Brook Lopez is another example. I should have mentioned with an Embiid or Jokic, who just has the capacity to bully Mitchell Robinson, not in every single situation, but in certain moments because he's big and he probably has about 25 pounds on Mitch, despite how heavy and how great shape that Mitch has gotten in at this point. So I say that to say that is a clear-cut weakness for the New York Knicks. And when they've gotten beaten by 15 or more points, that is far and away what stands out the most to me. And that is an issue when we talk about how fixable things are that I don't think is really fixable for the Knicks this season. I think that is why on this podcast we always talk about for this team to reach this ultimate destiny. And yes, Joel Embiid would be an interesting curveball in that he is such an overwhelming presence at the center position. He can make up for lack of size on the perimeter. But for the Knicks to ultimately get where they want to go, to be a true blue championship contender, they're going to have to get one of the star big wings in the NBA, because that is where you make your mark on the perimeter in terms of size and in terms of being able to handle size from another team. It's to have a Paul George type guy. It's to have a Kawhi Leonard type guy out there on the wing that can guard anyone. And where Quentin Grimes falls off in terms of being a truly elite defender, right? And this is like Prez mentioned this on this podcast, I think about a year and a half ago now, and it's stuck with me since. He's 6'5", like Trey Murphy III. The reason he's going to get, beyond how Grimes is playing this year, the reason he's going to end up getting probably $10 million more a year in annual value than a Quentin Grimes is the fact that he's 6'8" with like a 6'10" wingspan versus Grimes, who's 6'5" with, 6'7" wingspan. That makes all the difference in the world in terms of who you can guard, being able to rebound your position, and just being able to hold your own in those matchups against the great teams in the NBA. All right, so this question took a little longer than I thought. We will continue on talking about getting to some more of the reasons why the Knicks haven't been able to beat the best teams in the NBA. But before we do that, we have to take a quick detour and tell you about my good friends over at Prize Picks. So you might be asking at home, what is Prize Picks? Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports DFS platform in North America. We're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. And guys, if you know me, this is my single biggest concern with playing DFS, that there is a dude out there, and not just one dude, there are many a dude out there and a lady who went to an MIT or a Stanford or a U Chicago, somewhere I could not have gotten into school and studied statistics. And now they have a formula and they put all the names into their spreadsheet and it spits out exactly who is going to win or pretty close to it. And then they have a lot of money and they put that money in on volume and there's no chance you're going to beat them on basically any other platform. But the beauty of Prize Picks is all you have to do is you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player snap projections and you get to watch the winnings roll in. So you're not competing with any of that marine life. As Alex would put it, you're just competing against the projection. With basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. This weekend, I am taking the over on Jalen Brunson made field goals in a game and Tommy DeVito completions, the over-under. I'm going to set that at about, let's call it 34.5. That's a lofty number, but I think I have trust in my 2 New York heroes to get there. But that's what's so cool about it. You get to combine football and basketball. Here's the better thing. PrizePicks offers a reboot policy, so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. That is incredible because I don't know any other service that offers. In fact, PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. I want to remind you, you are watching Locked On Knicks, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, with that, guys, we are back, and I wanted to finish up this first question from our guy, Bugsy Siggs, a good longtime friend of the show, just Bugsy Sig, no S on that. But he wants to know why the Knicks have struggled against late competition this year. So we mentioned overwhelmed by size and length. I think the other effect of that, because I was mostly talking about how it affects their defense, you see a lot of inefficiency outside of Jalen Brunson because he's kind of the one guy in this roster who is able to get his shot off, no matter what the defense is and no matter how big the defense is, and he just finds ways to get to his spot. I think Julius Randle gets a little bit more affected by it when there's a bunch of size at the rim, and then everyone else is kind of hit or miss on any given night. Another side effect of that size and length, the rebounding advantage with Mitchell Robinson can be negated a bit. And it depends on the matchup because you look back to that New Orleans game where the Knicks got killed. Mitch had something like 9 offensive rebounds in the first half, and Jonas Valanciunas couldn't do anything with him. You look back on that game against Rudy Gobert and the Timberwolves, he still had a decent game. So it's not really, I'm going to correct myself in real time. It's not really size and length that kills them. Though I think teams with real girth, like a Rudy Gobert or a Brook Lopez, are able to hold their own in the most important moments and get big rebounds against Mitch in the most important moments, which undoubtedly hurts the Knicks offense because they are, and Jonathan Macri in his excellent Knicks Film School newsletter did a really great job breaking this down the other day. You look at kind of the 4 factors, right? The statistics that typically paint a good or bad NBA team. The Knicks excel in all of them except for their own effective field goal percentage and the effective field goal percentage they allow. So they're good at just about everything other than putting the ball in the basket and stopping the other team from putting the ball in the basket, which somehow doesn't cost them against bad teams because they're so good at not turning the ball over. They are pretty good at forcing turnovers. They're so good at rebounding on both ends of the floor. But those fine margins against the better teams dissipate just a bit. And I think in particularly dissipate in the fourth quarters of games where teams are a bit more locked in. And you've for a long time seen this trend with Tom Thibodeau, where his teams are better in the regular season than they are in the playoffs. And that's because those advantages on the margins that they can take by just simply playing harder and with more focus and with more discipline in the regular season go away in the playoffs, because other teams start to match that and have similar energy. And I think you see that down the stretch against good teams, where teams with centers that can physically hold up to Mitch are able to rebound. And teams like the Celtics with a stretch big like not like Mitchell Robinson, like Kristaps Porzingis that can pull him away from the rim, that obviously also, at least defensively, really substantially hurts his ability to rebound. And we saw that a little bit against the Suns, where they played with a whole lot of spacing, and the Knicks just could not get a rebound against a team that was not a very good rebounding team. And then the final one I had down, and this is kind of a lesser one, because I don't know if this is just my feeling on it or if this is backed up by fact. I'd have to go back and really look. But my gut instinct is they've struggled to stop stars down the stretch of games. And now that is an issue for every team in the NBA. That's why you would consider them stars, but they don't affect stars to the ability you would want. And that goes back to not having like a really big, really lengthy defender that can get into a star's grill and just bother them. And again, Quentin Grimes in the right matchup can be that guy. Dante DiVincenzo has had moments of doing that. Immanuel Quickley, certainly off the ball, can make plays that stop stars from ever getting the ball. RJ Barrett on the right night can bother them a little bit, but you go through their losses, and that's a theme to me, that like when push comes to shove and you get into these clutch situations, the Knicks are really reliant on playing great team defense because they don't have that truly elite, like 6'8", 6'10", Jalen McDaniels type of stopper. All right, our next question. And that was the only one we're going to spend 14 minutes on, because I thought it was a really good one from Bugsy Shane. This one comes from Michael Shane at Neb Sook. Follow at Neb Sook on Twitter. How much more likely is it that the Knicks resign IQ/match an offer in restricted free agency if they begin starting him over Grimes? Or do you think they're less likely to resign him, as they would have to pay him more as a starter? So I'm gonna start off by attacking the premise of this question. Michael, it's nothing personal. I really appreciate you asking. I think it's a fair question, but I just think it is highly, highly unlikely they start Immanuel Quickley. We have seen for years Tom Thibodeau go to incredible lengths not to start Immanuel Quickley. We all remember at the end of the 21-22 season, him insisting on starting Alec Brooks, who was shooting negative 16% at the rim, over Immanuel Quickley at the point guard spot. When Alec Burks, did I say Alec Brooks? I'm sorry if I did. Had never played point guard in his NBA career. And I don't even think played point guard at the college level. Point is, Tom Thibodeau does not see Immanuel Quickley as a starter. He often sees him as a finisher. I think he really loves him as a player, but for whatever reason, he does not want to start off with that lack of size on the floor, even though the lineup data with him and Jalen Brunson, I haven't really dove into it as much this year, but as far as I've seen, it is still spectacular. The Knicks' best lineup still features Brunson and Quickley playing together. That's Brunson, Quickley, Hart, Randall, Mitch, and has just blown teams out of the water. And that's what your starting lineup would be, though, I guess, with RJ Barrett in place of Hart. That theoretically you could also start Hart and bring RJ off the bench, especially with how he's playing right now. So I've made it really clear for a long time, I would love if they were willing to start Immanuel Quickley. I do not think that is going to happen. But let me just indulge this as a hypothetical from Michael. I think if they did start him, I don't think it would change things that much, because he would still be behind Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle in the pecking order. His counting stats might be a bit better, but I don't really see a world where he's putting up monster numbers and it significantly changes his financial future. I think the one thing that could potentially shift that is if he started because Jalen Brunson got hurt. And that is the scenario, more so than Grimes continuing to struggle, where I see Immanuel Quickley, because you could put him in without affecting the size that you have on the floor and actually getting better defensively, instead of maybe getting a little worse defensively with Quickley out there in Grimes's place. And in that scenario, I can see his numbers rising. I can see him putting together a 20-game stretch like we saw last year whenever he started, where he averages maybe, 22, 23 points per game, 6-7 assists per game, 5 rebounds per game, like a few steals per game, and makes himself more attractive to a team like a Detroit Pistons or even an Orlando Magic, who, despite how good they are, very scary situation. They are going to have a whole lot of money this summer to spend. All right, our next question comes from a longtime friend of the show, buy low, sell high. And it's more of a question. It's more of a statement than a question, but I'm going to treat it as a question. Buy low, sell high at swing_trade55. So you know where he's coming from. The man lives that trade machine life. We can't move forward with 2 starters averaging single digits. How long do we give Grimes? Talk about a step back this year. Painful. Then shows poor character, blaming others at elimination game. Hashtag SMH, shaking my head. Mitch, then Hart, now Grimes. Coincidence? Issues maybe here at Locked On Knicks. All right, so let's address this in a couple different parts. I don't have a big issue with the starters averaging single digits. That is far from my biggest concern because you have guys off the bench that compensate for that production, and that's also just what the center position is going to be in this offense. Obviously, do I wish Quentin Grimes was getting the touches and shooting well enough to average double digits? Absolutely, but I don't really see that as a hyper realistic outcome. Talk about taking a step back this year. Painful. Agree with that. How long do we give Grimes? I think that is, and we got another question that is similar to this, and I'll mention again there. But I think that depends on how Tom Thibodeau is willing to treat this situation. If he wants to do one of the things Alex and I suggested, which is putting in some Evan Fournier type actions to get Grimes the ball and involve him with Julius Randle on dribble handoffs and let him shoot coming off of screens. If the Knicks were going to incorporate that into their offense, then I would give it 5 games to see how Grimes shoots. Because I still think, as I advocated last show, whether it is as a starter or it is off the bench, unless you're including him in a trade for a player of equal or better value, you're going to need Quentin Grimes at some point this season. He is your best perimeter defender. He is probably still outside of Jalen Brunson because Brunson has just hit another level we've never even seen from Grimes. Outside of Jalen Brunson, he is still, in terms of talent, the second best 3-point shooter on this roster. I'd still have him ahead of DiVincenzo. I'd still have him ahead of Quickley in that category. But if they're not going to make an effort to get him the ball more, he has shown an inability to figure that out on his own. At that point, I wouldn't waste any more time. I'd move him to the bench right now because I don't think this is a situation that's going to change. And even if he starts making a few more shots, I still don't think he's a great fit in this lineup. I think you'd rather have someone like DiVincenzo, who, for whatever reason, has shown more of an ability to find the basketball than Quentin Grimes has. All right, next we are going to get to a really fun question about what a Quentin Grimes trade would look like, whether the Knicks could potentially deal him and more for backup 4. Before we do that, I got to tell you about our buddies over at Jase Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we talk for just a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season over a decade. This is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than a loved one getting sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll all be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinitis, skin infection, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. All right, let's get into Paul. Paul, I never know how to say your last name. I think it's Mahir. 3274, excuse me, from YouTube. So first and foremost, thanks as always for making my days better, and I hope you guys are in good spirits. Paul, I keep forgetting to respond to them, but I've seen all your YouTube comments. They mean a lot. I really, really appreciate you looking out, and it makes me really happy that we make your days better. I always love getting comments like that. He says, let's say Grimes doesn't recover. Which backup 4 could a package of Grimes and Fournier, perhaps plus a pick, land us? So I went pretty deep on this question, even though my answer is probably that the Knicks are not going to pursue that type of trade. And I don't think they feel a particularly desperate need for a backup 4 because Josh Hart has he's only hurt them by the fact that he hasn't shot the ball particularly well at points this year. It hasn't been aggressive enough. I don't think he's hurt them defensively guarding 4s, except for in very specific matchups, like with the Timberwolves. We saw them go at that look with Naz Reid or with Kyle Anderson a couple of times and have some success. But by and large, that has not been a huge issue for Quentin Grimes in the Knicks. But I'm just going to run through it. The Milwaukee Bucks and Bobby Portis, that is the first name I went to. I think he's probably in the category of too good to pull off that trade. And I think someone suggested it earlier, and I said earlier in the season, I said neither the Knicks nor the Bucks would do that trade, because I would still say that Quentin Grimes, pretty clearly, despite his struggles so far this year, has higher upside than a Bobby Portis does. But I do think the Knicks, like if that was a 1-for-1 trade that was on the table, I kind of think the Knicks would do it, because they could use Portis' size, they could use his shooting, they could use his defense as a post spot, his scoring, more than they could use what Grimes is giving them right now. I just think having a stretch 4 is maybe a better fit. And of course, it would go a long way to clearing up the minutes glut, where you would get to play Immanuel Quickley, probably something like 32 minutes a night, which is what he should be playing. You get to play Dante DiVincenzo, something like 25, 26, 27 minutes a night, which the way he's shooting so far this year, he absolutely should be playing. So that would be a nice way to clear up that glut. And in the non-Julius Randle minutes, you have a little bit more size on the floor. And I wouldn't mind if you took 6, 7, 8 minutes away from RJ Barrett and a couple away from Josh Hart to create that space for Bobby Portis. The Sixers, I doubt the Sixers and Knicks would have an in-season trade, given where they are in the standings and the fact that they're in the same division. But a Nick Batum or Paul Reed, I think that would be interesting. Would I want to give Quentin Grimes for those guys? No, not particularly, but either one of those guys, I think would make the Knicks better in the back of 4 spots. Just having like bigger, longer defenders, and Batum, despite the fact that he is, I think, 34 or 35 years old at this point, and has been in the NBA seemingly for the last 20 years. Still probably a better defender guarding big wings than anyone the Knicks have. I can't say I've watched a ton of Sixers this year, but watching the Clippers a bit last year, seems like he still has his fastball for the most part. Indiana, we're going to bring back Obi Toppin, who's playing pretty well. No, Obi, I think, is in absolutely the right spot for him. Maybe a conversation for another day, whether the Knicks should have done right by Obi or they should have done right by the Knicks and just kept him to play 13, 14 minutes at the backup 4. I think we wouldn't have been seeing the improvements we're seeing now from Obi. I think we probably would have been seeing something very similar to what we saw last year, where he was mostly a 3-point shooter. Indiana, novel concept. They actually play him at center sometimes, and their offense scores just about 1 million points when they do. The Nets, Ben Simmons. That was just for a joke. Hawks, DeAndre Hunter. A name we've thrown on this podcast before. Interesting in the sense that he fits the big wing mold that the Knicks just don't have, because he's about 6'8", and that was why he was a top 5 pick. He's basically been the same dude since his rookie year, right? This season, he averages 14 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, shoots the ball pretty well. Shooting better from the free throw line than he ever has, 89% from the free throw line this year. He's intriguing in that he's a relatively efficient big wing who is a solid defender. Why he was a top 5 pick is people thought he was going to be an absolutely elite defender at the wing spot. That has not come to fruition. The other guy threw out there was Jalen Johnson. I don't think the Hawks are in any rush to trade him, because he's one of their best young players. And they don't have a huge need for someone like Quentin Grimes, just because they have their backcourt locked up with Trey and DeJounte Murray, and they can't really afford to get any smaller on the wing. So I don't see that one coming to fruition. Toronto, Precious Achiuwa. I think if the Knicks offered Quentin Grimes for Precious Achiuwa, Masai Ujiri would rush, like sprint to lock that trade in. Given the current legal battle between the two teams, I don't really think it's particularly likely. And this is something we can discuss in terms of OG Anunoby trades too, that the two teams are going to have a trade, because I think there is a lot of bad blood there right now. But that would be kind of an interesting one in terms of having a good defender at the stretch at the 4 who can kind of shoot. He can't really shoot. He's been around 26% from 3 the last 2 seasons. Not a backup, but I put down Bojan Bogdanovic of the Pistons, Ian Begley of SNY. The great Ian Begley had some thoughts on that today or the other day. He said he doesn't think anything is imminent there, and Detroit has no immediate plans to trade Bogdanovic. They want to see how his shooting can potentially help them, given that they are paying Monty Williams to be the highest paid coach in NBA history and are currently on one of the longest losing streaks in NBA history. So that might be on the back burner, though. Maybe if they continue to really struggle, he'll be available. And as we talked about on a previous pod that you can go back and listen to last week, I would be interested in the Knicks acquiring Bogdanovic, and I think he could really help transform their teams and help their margin for error in their games against great teams. The Wizards, Danilo Gallinari, that would be a smaller scale version of this trade. You could get that done, I think, with just Evan Fournier or just a pick. You don't have to trade Grimes for that. Naz Reid is interesting. He's more of a center than a power forward, but he could probably play power forward because of his shooting ability. He would be a really good option for the Knicks. I don't know if the Timberwolves are particularly inclined to trade him, though Quentin Grimes would be a good option for them. So that's something that I could see the Knicks looking into. For the Thunder, Ousmane Dieng, probably too young and too good, though Grimes would, I would argue, be like an improvement on Lou Dort for them just because he's a better shooter. I think he'd be great fit in their lineup. That's something I could see the Knicks pursuing and being pretty interesting. I'm at a couple more names here. Maxi Kleber, I think he's washed. The Lakers, Rui Hachimura, he's shooting really well this year. That's an interesting fit. Grimes, I think, would be an awesome fit in the starting lineup for the Lakers if they're going to continue to bring Austin Reeves off the bench. So that's one I could see both teams agreeing on. It would make the Knicks a little bit bigger. It would give the Lakers just a little bit more spacing. The Rui's actually been the better shooter this year, so maybe they'd be reticent to do that. The Kings, Harrison Barnes, old name, would always be a good one for the Knicks, though I don't know if they can find him enough minutes. The Rockets, Tari Eason, who on very low volumes at 40% from three this year. So those are some of the names they could trade for. Do I ultimately see the Knicks doing any of these? No, I have a feeling they're going to keep Grimes and try to rehabilitate his value, whether that is to be a long-term backcourt mate for Jalen Brunson or to ultimately trade him. All right. Let's rank some assets real quick before we wrap this one up. All right. So this one comes from at CRod79. This comes from, I should mention our YouTube community page, which whenever we do a mailbag, you can also drop your questions there. CRod79 wants to know, who would you get more / better assets for? Grimes, IQ, Hartenstein, or Randall, or some combination of them? The answer is definitely some combination of them. But if I'm just ranking them one by one, you would get the most assets for Julius Randle, the next most for Immanuel Quickley, third most for Quentin Grimes, fourth most for Isaiah Hartenstein. And that sounds crazy to say about Randle, because when we were panicking early in the year and talking about potentially trading him, I was saying like he's pretty much untradeable. But the way he's rebounded, the way he's playing, like I think you could certainly find a team trying to get better right now. They would pursue Julius Randle. And unfortunately, I think because it's a walk year for Immanuel Quickley, though you would get his restricted free agency rights, I don't think there are teams willing to give up a lot for Quickley, though. If the Knicks are inclined to trade him before the deadline, I would certainly look into what the Magic would be willing to offer him and maybe swap him out for someone like Cole Anthony, who has had a better offensive season than Quickley this year, but is certainly not the defender that Quickley is. You could talk about swapping for someone like Jalen Suggs if you want an elevated version of a Deuce McBride coming off the bench for your team, or you could maybe trade him for picks to the Magic. The Knicks could turn those picks into something else, kind of like what we saw the Sixers do in the James Harden trade. There were certainly teams that would want Quickley. And then Grimes and Hartenstein, in terms of how they played this year, obviously Hartenstein's probably been a little bit better. Grimes, given his upside and his profile as kind of a true blue 3-and-D guy that are still much desired, but there's very much a deficit of those guys in the NBA. I think Grimes, even in a down year, still has a lot of value. All right. One final question comes from Paul Jeffrey at Paul the Great 9. And he says the NBA 2K24 has, NBA 2K24 has an era mode where you can play in the 90s, 2000s, or the 2010s and lead that group for a decade against the players of that era. I chose the 90s and I'm rolling with Patty Ewing and Starks. Would either of you fellas pick the 2000s or 2010s to play? So if it was with the Knicks specifically, I would probably try to reconstruct those that 2012, 2013 team and just manage it a little bit better and find a way to bring in some more young talent around Carmelo Anthony and Tyson Chandler and build out around them. I think that would be cool. But if you're asking me just which era I want to start with a raw team, I think the early 2000s, just because that was the era I grew up loving NBA basketball. And I knowing what I know now, I would probably try to build a modern roster in the 2000s with a lot of shooting, a lot of skilled bigs, and maybe try to recreate like the team that stands out to me that was ahead of their time in that capacity was the early 2000s Sacramento Kings. So I would try to create my version of that. But it was a fun question to end on, Paul. All right, we will wrap up on that. That is it for this edition of the Locked On Knicks podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every single day. And continue to enjoy all the other fantastic content, including our 24/7 streaming now that Locked On offers. But until then, I'm Gavin Schall. We'll be back with a recap of Celtics Knicks very soon. And we'll talk to you very soon on Locked On Knicks.